Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, November 10th, 2016. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani, back inside our New York City studios. We are a mere 2 days away from UFC 205, and for the first time in the history of this show, we're doing it from our New York City studio in the same city as a UFC event. How about that? History is being made here today, my friends. Also, if you're joining us live, yes, we are on an hour earlier. That's because in around 3 hours' time, there will be a UFC 205 pre-fight press conference with the top 3 fights on hand, UFC President Dana White as well. So we wanted to...
3.5 hours, given Connor's on it.
That is true. That is true. Sorry, I forgot about his tardiness. So we wanted to have enough time to go over there. And of course, we'll be previewing the card. We won't have reaction to the press conference, but later on in the day on MMAfighting.com, we will react to what should be a very entertaining press conference. And how about this? We are going 5 deep today. It's an A-plus team. Not just A-plus. That's how big UFC 205 is here in New York. Of course, you know this man, Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. That is Sean Al-Shadi, also of MMAfighting.com. Now, he's not making his MMA Beat debut. He's been on the show before, but on the road, first time in this studio. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you. That is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall of MMAfighting.com. And that over there, the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post. Okay, let's start with UFC 205, guys. And I want to start with everything but McGregor-Alvarez, because we'll talk about them, and surely we've given them enough airtime. What, as of right now, 2 days before the event, Luke, is the most interesting storyline, in your opinion, that you're kind of excited to see how it all plays out?
I'll give you 1A, 1B.
Okay.
Start with 1B, the one that's lesser. Joanna Jędrzejczyk changed camps between fights, and I wonder how that will affect her. Now, this is not the same as Dos Anjos going away from something like that was a known quantity of greatness and feels like maybe downgrading because we didn't really know what he was doing in his new situation. American Top Team is about as good as it gets in the sport, so I think most people feel like it's an upgrade, but no one's really talking about it. I spoke to King Mo a week or two ago, and he was saying, he trains at ATT, he was saying, all the good camps he's been to, it still takes 2 or 3 fights to work everything out and feel like everything is gelling, so I still expect her to win, but something to pay attention to there. The one I'm really paying attention to, though, is the Wonderboy Woodley dynamic, and I find this to be fascinating. First of all, and you can attest to this, both of those guys showed up yesterday, as my boy Louis Marco would say, diced to the socks. I mean, these guys are
What does this mean?
They are in tremendous shape.
Okay.
They are in tremendous, and they're always in good shape. They're pros, but I mean, when I was watching them work out, you could just feel this is like an elite division, and these two guys absolutely deserve to be fighting at the top of it. Whoa, okay? And then to see Wonderboy assume this fan-designated coronation as the guy, what if Woodley wins? Here's what I wonder. Are the fans going to say, you know what, we finally come around to Woodley, or is he going to become the #1 villain in the UFC? Like, people who really can't stand him. I don't know that beating Wonderboy really gets him into a better place with them. That's what I'm looking at. I think most people think Wonderboy's going to win, and maybe this is a moot conversation, but let's be prepared for reality where Woodley retains his title and is loathed for doing so.
Yeah, and to your point, I thought all 6 fighters who showed up to the media workouts appeared to be in tremendous shape. Joanna, Carlina as well. I mean, it seemed like everyone has brought their A game.
It's just that those two are the biggest, and physically the biggest, and you could feel it, man.
How about you, Sean?
To me, the most interesting story is a little farther down the card, and that is the saga of Khabib Nurmagomedov. What a long, strange, bizarre road this guy has been on, and I think you could see it most in his interview yesterday with you, which was just immensely compelling. The frustration with that he's holding right now, of basically, like you have said, being used as a pawn in the main event of this game, of setting up this McGregor-Alvarez dynamic. This is a guy who was the guy for so long. He was basically the uncrowned king. And now he's sort of in the background, but still in the foreground. I mean, especially now with Tony Ferguson looming over everything, having won 9 straight fights. What happens to Khabib after this? He seems like very convinced that that title shot is his and his alone, and there's no chance for any argument. And I'm curious because there are so many different roads that this could lead towards him not getting that. I mean, if Conor wins, obviously the Nate fight is looming. If Tony is looming, just in general. I think the fallout from that has the potential to be very explosive, and it should be interesting. And also, I mean, just in general, It's been 2 years since he's fought a top quality opponent, and that has an effect. And I wonder what kind of Khabib we're going to see. If we're going to see the old Khabib, the killer.
Great one, yes.
I know we're not talking about McGregor yet, but it's funny that so many people are affected below him, no matter what happens.
That's true.
You know, it's always a ripple effect with him, whatever kind of happens, as we're talking about Khabib Nurmagomedov. But I mean, I'm kind of with Luke. I think the Wonder Boy story and the Woodley one, since you talked about Woodley, I also look at this as like the big coming out party for Wonder Boy in a way, because you know, the way this fight came together, it was Woodley wins the belt, but he wasn't calling out Wonder Boy, wasn't calling out this, and there's a little bit of reservation there, like, well, why wouldn't he want to face the number one contender? And I think that when you really look at him, you know, what he's been able to do to Johnny Hendricks, I mean, he's not been the same since. I know there's other factors, but just beating Rory McDonald the way he did, you just look at those fights and you think, once he gets that title shot, it's always like Nurmagomedov in that sense. You're always like, if he gets the title shot, once he gets there, you know he's going to seize that moment. And I feel like we're at that moment for him. He wanted to fight on the New York card because he kind of looks at it as a surrogate home, and here he is. And he gets this chance to really, I think, really showcase himself, because he's been a main event, but it's always a little bit dimly lit light compared to these big events, and here he is in this big spotlight. So I think he could win over a lot of fans on this one coming up.
Do you agree with Luke in the sense that if he beats Wonder Boy, who's so beloved, who's so squeaky clean, that it almost hurts him in the sense, I think it gets people a little more emotionally invested in him in the sense that, like, okay, they're going to hate him more, and at the end of the day, even if they hate you, as long as they pay to watch you lose, it's all good for your bank account.
We'll start a chant. Who's got my
back?
That's
right. Just real quickly, if he beats Lawler and he beats Wonder Boy, he's the guy who beats your favorite fighter.
Sure.
It's true.
You don't want to. You don't. I mean, you do want to be that guy, but you kind of don't want to be that guy,
man. Like, it's always one of those things. Like, you want to care, right? Like, so it's like emotion is a heated thing. Emotion compels you to watch. So if people have anger or hatred towards him, or whatever, it's all good for him. I think he's learning to embrace that a little bit.
It's important how he beats them. If he beats them like he beat Robbie Lawler, I think people can stomach it. If you're laying on top of him, they don't like that sort of thing.
He beats him, and he also does it. Not just the way he wins, but also the way he reacts on the mic after.
Sure.
I mean, that's all going to play into it. And I think the mic is kind of a transition into where I'm looking. I mean, first thing I thought about was Khabib, because, you know, what was the criticism, which I don't share this criticism of Tony Ferguson, but the criticism that was coming down on him was, well, you had this great performance and then you didn't really call out anybody. Well, to me, you speak loudest when you are performing. When you go out there and fight and you put on a great show, that speaks loudly. And I think that Khabib has an opportunity, you know, now the ball's in his court. And I know Tony Ferguson had a great performance against the former champion, but that's in the past. I mean, it's only a week in the past, but now it's Khabib's, it's his opportunity. He's got the chance, and he can go out there on Saturday and be the guy and get that and win that title shot. And I think that my real sort of takeaway for this is that, you know, we all know that it's all about the super fight at the top of the card, champion versus champion. That's the one that everybody's focusing on, but it invariably comes down to somebody else rising up, and it could be one of the other two champions who's defending the belt. I mean, you know, Joanna Jędrzejczyk is now, you know, other than Demetrius Johnson, she may be the most dominant champion we have. And we've always talked about the most dominant champion in the UFC being a woman. Well, it may still be the case, only it's a different woman than the one we always imagine. So what is she going to do? You know, what is, you know, the one that Luke and Chuck talked about, that title fight? I mean, either one of those guys can just become like an immense figure based upon a win. And then even you trickle down even farther. I mean, Chris Weidman may earn himself another title shot. So, you know, we've got we had four champions. We have four champions. We had four ex-champions. Now we have, with Rashad Evans being off, we only have three ex-champions. There's so many opportunities for high-level things to happen that have nothing to do with the main event.
Let me just ask you this, though, because you say that Ferguson, you know, didn't necessarily have to go on the mic. You shouldn't feel like you need to go on the mic because your work should speak for itself. And I understand 100% where you're coming from. But in this day and age, given the cards that we're playing with here, given the fact that Nate Diaz got the payday of a lifetime, almost solely based on a promo that he cut afterwards, why wouldn't you play that game? Why would you turn your back on that game?
I understand that there's certainly wisdom in doing that, but I guess there's just that part of me that looks at the performance, you know, before that fight ends. When you see the fighters going at it, and the person who performs most spectacularly, and that was Tony Ferguson that night. And when that fight ended, I didn't need to hear him mention the name of the champion. I had already heard him call out the champion just the way he fought.
I think he should have. I mean, the bottom line is when you win 9 fights in a row and you've seen kind of what's going on, you're planting the seed for public persuasion and public pressure too, because if he puts it out there, you know the public wants to do it. They remember the call out. They jump on board. And how do these matchmakers sometimes operate? What the fans want, right? So it's like I feel like you have to start the wheels in motion, and indifference is just no way to. It's just no way to do it. We've seen so many guys languish in that territory. Frankie Edgar, that's another storyline that's going on. This was a guy it took a long time to realize he needed to be vocal. You know, he spent too much time being a company man, and I think he realized it was to his detriment at some point, and he missed out on some opportunities down the line. And I mean, he speaks out now, but now he's getting a lot more. You know, he's currying a lot more favor with fans who want to see him fight these guys. You know what I'm saying? But it's like it's more because he's vocal about it.
I mean, I agree with you that it doesn't hurt, but I think that your fighting style, like Khabib, who's a wrestler and is going to grind you out. Maybe it's a little bit more incumbent upon him to get the excitement going. But a guy like Tony Ferguson, I mean, if you don't get excited just watching him out there fight, if that didn't sell you on him getting a title shot, there are no words that he could say that would make you more excited.
But I don't think it's that simple, though, because in this game, it's an unfortunate side of the game for a lot of fighters, just because this doesn't come naturally for a lot of fighters. But it is a very what have you done for me lately game. And those promos, just to even get in a commercial, like you can build commercials around it, you can just build features around it. You need to inject yourself in that storyline. And he honestly did do himself a disservice because you know that if Khabib goes out there and puts on a very dominant performance, Khabib's going to have a line. He's going to have one or two lines. He's going to say something about Conor or Eddie or just inject himself in that. And that's going to be the last thing that people remember.
Let me wait. This is my, I know everyone's going to be like, oh, here comes Contrarian Luke. I absolutely.
Well, now they are.
Now they are. I absolutely loved that Tony Ferguson didn't say a word about it. I wanted to take my shirt off and swing it around my head like Petey Pablo. I was so happy about it. Let's review the facts for just a moment. Tony Ferguson fought Rafael dos Anjos, the guy who folded Donald Cerrone like a suitcase, over a mile into the sky with a higher offensive output than McGregor did against Nate Diaz. It is shocking to me that we put pressure on these guys to then, not only do you need to fight Rafael dos Anjos in the heavens, now you need to come and do this as well. And to your point, actually, Tony's good at it. But when Tony did an interview after the fight with Hadi Androl, they asked him, what about, they gave him every opportunity to speak about it. And at every juncture, he kept telling everyone, I don't care. I don't care. This is not a value to me.
The roof doesn't work.
Hold on a second. Yes, it does. It is what he wants. What he wants is to be an excellent martial artist.
Yeah. He wants to get paid, too.
Of course. Sure. But he doesn't want to get paid to the point where he's out there saying things.
I agree with you fundamentally. I'm just saying, like, it's one of those.
Is it incontestable that had he said something, it would be a real-world benefit? There is no argument. Yeah. Everyone is right. Everyone's right about it. But I love the fact that in this modern age, when these guys have to switch stances in the middle of combinations, and this guy was doing it where planes are flying by, and doing it at a level greater than McGregor did against Nate Diaz, which was a much lower elevation, we should just sit back and be like, you know what? What a warrior that is. If you don't feel like you have to say anything and you don't want the money that bad, it is good on you.
I mean, yeah, we should, but that's not realistic.
I don't want a fighter to do anything he doesn't want to do, and if he doesn't care about it, end of argument.
Here are the facts that Tony is currently facing. He's won 9 in a row. No one's ever done that at lightweight. But Khabib is what, 23-0?
Yeah.
So
he actually said yesterday 24-0.
24. Okay. So that's number one. His most recent win over Rafael dos Anjos. Khabib beat him 2.5 years ago. His last loss, Michael Johnson. Khabib wins on Saturday. He's got that. So I'm sorry, Tony, the timing isn't working in your favor. You got to go on the mic and maybe think outside the box. And I know you've just been punched in the head for 25 minutes, but maybe think.
Too.
And that is asking a lot. But maybe it's something like, look, I'm not going to be your monkey. My work should speak for itself. I've just done what no lightweight has ever done in UFC history. That should say something. But to just be like, yo, peace, I'm out of here. Don't tell me you don't care about the belt, because the belt is the lottery ticket for your kid, your wife.
If he comes back and he complains, why am I not getting a title shot? Then we can review back to his days in Mexico and be like, dude, this is on you. But to the extent he says, I don't care. To the extent he goes, what's your prediction for Conor versus Eddie? He goes, those two morons can knock each other out. I got bigger things to worry about. That was his answer.
What are said bigger things?
I don't know what his.
But let me ask
that guy is crazy.
Let me raise this. We saw the performance that Tony Ferguson put on. It was exhilarating. And then he didn't say very much afterward. let's say Khabib goes out there and grinds out a 3-round decision. He takes down Michael Johnson each of the rounds, basically, dominant, but doesn't damage him that much, doesn't take him out, but he grinds it out. He wins the unanimous decision, gets up and says something amazingly poetic on mic. Who's supposed to get that title shot? I mean, I want to see the guy who is dominant and exhilarating. I want to see the guy who puts on that kind of performance. That's if I'm marketing. I mean, I think each guy warrants it from a meritocracy standpoint, but in terms of the marketing, I want to see.
But you're
the guy
looking at it in an idealistic way. Nate Diaz had no business being in that Conor McGregor fight, but they had the promo to sell it, and that's all they needed. So if Khabib gets on the mic and cuts a promo, they're going to use that, and he's going to be the front runner. And that's just the game. Like, we can't pretend like that's not.
And then yesterday you got Khabib sitting there like Darth Nurmagomedov with that hood on, just spitting fire to everyone who would talk to him.
That's good.
I'm not mad at that. That's what he wants to do. I'm just saying, at what point are we going to stop putting demands on these guys? We need you to be a world-class fighter and fight at 8,000 feet elevation.
I think that's oversimplifying it, though, because we're not putting demands on it.
Yes, it's the system.
I personally don't care.
I mean,
I want
I'm the one
Tony
waving my
Ferguson to
shirt
get the
around.
title.
You're right.
You just said he should have done that. No one else is saying that.
I want Tony Ferguson to get the title shot, but the demands are placed on him outside of us. It's not journalists.
It's the system that's broken, right? It's the system which the UFC gives title shots, based on hype and promos. That's the broken system. We're just the ones saying, look, if you want to get paid, you got to play the game.
But he says he doesn't care, so why not just listen to him?
I guess I don't believe him. I mean, I honestly, I guess I just don't
There is
believe
that
it.
too.
I don't believe that a man who just had a kid doesn't want to get paid.
But
You
let's
can tell me
also-
all you want that you don't care about belts and you care about black belts more. That doesn't put food on your table. Then go do something
let's add
else.
into the equation the guy who runs the show, Conor McGregor. If he's he'll be otherwise busy doing other things on Saturday night, but if he watches the tape and he sees Khabib go out there and within 10 seconds Michael Johnson's on his back and doesn't get up until the horn sounds for the end of that round. Next round, within 10 seconds he's on his back and he doesn't get up until the end of that round. McGregor's going to, he has he has some influence here.
Sure.
And is he going to want to go out there and compete against that guy, or is he going to want to go out there and compete against a guy who takes chances and would put on would basically dance with him, a guy who's going to put on a performance where he can shine and at the risk of having the other guy shine. I mean, I think that McGregor is also. He can handle all the words. He doesn't have to have a guy who's a wordsmith. He needs a guy who he can sell as somebody who I'm gonna beat in a really in an exciting fashion, and that guy is Tony Ferguson.
He wants to be emotionally invested.
That's difficult also, though, because he already has that guy in Nate Diaz, and that's inevitably going to happen, and it almost feels like that's setting up for it if McGregor
And he
wins.
wouldn't have had Nate Diaz if Diaz never cut those promos on him. He needs to feel like he is being sort of attacked, and he needs to feel emotionally invested in the upcoming contest. If that wasn't the case, he'd be fighting Jose Aldo, but he feels like there's nothing to gain. He's not emotionally invested in that. So then let me ask you this. Around 6 weeks ago, we talked about the Jeremy Stephens situation, right? Jeremy Stephens gets on the mic. He seizes an opportunity. He's on Jimmy Kimmel. People are talking about Jeremy Stephens and Conor McGregor in the same sentence. What an opportunity for Jeremy Stephens, who's always kind of been like that mid-card, really fun fighter. And since then, and I'm wondering if you guys agree, Chuck, I'll start with you. I feel like he's kind of dropped the ball here. He wants nothing to do with that. So if you want nothing to do with that, why did you do it in the first place? You should be the guy who's taking this baton and being like, holy cow, I'm now in that discussion. Are you surprised that he has now taken this stance?
Because obviously it was, I feel like it was a pre-formulated plan to speak up. Maybe if a situation arose, it sure seemed like he was seizing an opportunity that he wanted to do. But I think somehow, because I tried to contact him in the aftermath, and it was shut down immediately by his management, that he was taking a break from all media and all this stuff, and I thought, that's bizarre. For one reason, you might not double down on it. First of all, it just changes the narrative. You're leaving it as a joke that just hovers in the air at that point. It just hovers forever. You could at least evolve the idea, explain why you did that, or clarify it and try to come across better. You know what I mean? Or whatever. You could just change the narrative. That's how this thing works. So I was a little surprised he hasn't tried to capitalize on it, because you're right. Ultimately, it comes down to we do mention him. We're sitting here talking about it right now because he did that.
Yeah.
If you're going to do it, follow it through. You know what I'm saying?
I'm not agreeing with Chuck and Sean about Tony Ferguson, but about Jeremy Stephens, that's a different story. I mean, he actually started the narrative. He's the guy. It wasn't McGregor didn't start that.
Yeah.
Jeremy Stephens started it, and then That's it. I mean, crickets.
Exactly.
But did he need to end it? I mean, Jeremy could continue to say, look, I'm going to knock out Frankie Edgar, the guy that you didn't want to fight, and then I'm going to knock your ass out. And if you don't want a piece, then you'll know who I am. You know, like it's right there on a silver platter for him,
Maybe
and
he
I'm
needs
shocked
to do
that
it after he performs that.
Maybe.
If he can knock out Frankie Edgar, maybe then he talks. Maybe he just figures, well, you know, Frankie Edgar, I'm not sure I want to be talking about this other guy while I got Frankie Edgar in front of me.
Are you surprised?
This is the weird one for me, and I agree with Jeff and everyone here. Like, this is not the same thing as Tony Ferguson. This is a guy who started it. We're all in agreement there. The crazy part to me is I think him and his management, and I don't know this to be true, but this is just my read on that, Chuck, too, because we tried to get him on our show, and it was the same radio silence.
I tried to get him on as well.
Yeah, it's just impossible. And I think if you talk to them now, the response you basically get is, not in these words, they feel like they look at it like a zero-sum game. Like, he tried, maybe spontaneously, maybe planned. Conor did what he did. It backfired. So now let's just cut our losses and walk away, rather than repurpose it. They feel like they took an L, so they're just going to back away. And it's like, you don't have to keep taking an L. Like, you can turn this into a W. But they don't see it that way.
Yeah. Did you want to say something?
No, I mean, there was an opportunity there to have the last word, have the last say, and he just left it hanging in the air.
You have it. Like you just said, if he goes out there and smokes Frankie Edgar, right? Like, and he's been talking about that. I mean, I guess it still is there, but I mean, if he had been building it up, you're watching that fight with a special kind of, a different kind of interest. You know what I'm saying? Because you're right, with Nate Diaz and it's such a whims and fate crossroads all the time for Conor McGregor. I feel like it's never just a linear, like, oh, this guy this. It's always kind of his preference and where he wants. You know what I mean? Yeah. There's so many factors in it. If I'm Stevens, I'm playing that game.
Yeah, and if Conor McGregor has taught us one thing and one thing only, it's that there's no such thing as an L. I mean, there is no such thing as a loss. Look at what the immediate aftermath of him being choked out by Nate Diaz. He immediately showed off his best. Coming out and being very humble, and then, you know, in that moment, sort of acknowledging Diaz being the better man that night in a very humble way, but then started ramping up his counterattack for, like, I want him again, and not accepting any other bout, and single-mindedly going after that one guy. I mean, this is Jeremy Stevens, man. You know, you started something with McGregor. He responded. If McGregor had ignored him, I'd say it was a different story. But McGregor, he baited McGregor, and McGregor bit hard. But man, that's the beginning of the game. That's not the end.
Yeah, and okay, so let me ask you guys about another storyline that was sort of touched upon, but I want to just dig a little deeper. And you know, it's funny because we tend to call these cards like, oh, this is the greatest one of all time. This is really a throwback card, in my opinion. Like, I remember UFC 104, Chael Sonnen and Yushin Okami were on the untelevised prelims. I mean, UFC cards used to always be like this. And what I mean by that is chock full of storylines. It's only recently where we've kind of, you know, said, okay, as long as there's 3 good pay-per-view fights, that's good enough for us. Anyway, Chris Weidman, Yoel Romero. Jacare Souza was supposed to fight Luke Rockhold in a couple weeks. And Rockhold pulls out, he's injured, and now Jacare is like, all right, I'm not fighting anyone else but Michael Bisping. I don't think anyone would really be upset if Jacare fights for the belt next, but I think that if Chris Weidman, again, in this sort of vein of seizing the moment and what have you done for me lately and us having short-term memories, if he has a win, especially in emphatic fashion, and the crowd is going nuts and chanting USA or whatever, and he has this emotional post-fight interview about how this means the world to him, fighting at home, I'm the next guy, I'm going to get my belt back, all this stuff, I feel like he's the front runner. Does he have to do something spectacular like that, you know, on the mic and in the fight to be the number 1 contender, or is a win enough for Chris Weidman on Saturday? Meaning, right now it's like a 2-horse race, right, between these two guys. Jacare almost gets there by default because Rockhold pulled out. How does Weidman now pull ahead from him? Is it just a win, or does he have to do a little more on Saturday?
I honestly think it might just be a win, because he's going to be the last one at that point to have fought and won within that 4-person space that all of those middleweights exist in. Because it is, like you said, it's a very strange fog that the middleweight division's in right now. It's obviously Jacare at this moment, but as soon as something happens again, I hate to harp on it, but
it's who goes last a lot of times.
Yeah.
And it also will have been a win over a guy who beat Jacare. I mean, I know that everybody's, it was a really tight fight. I had Jacare, you know. the guy who had his arm raised was not Jacare.
Yoel hasn't lost, right? Like in the UFC?
No.
Because, I mean, that by itself has
That says
its own,
something,
it
yeah.
says something. But if you were to do it emphatically, I feel like it's a slam dunk. He's the guy, right?
Okay.
If he's able to put him away emphatically in Madison Square Garden, he's going to get all that press. He's kept Bisping very fresh on his lips the whole way, like he's been talking about it. I just feel like that's a slam dunk at that point.
Yeah, you positioned it like Jacare was at the front. I think in an abstract sense, people are like, yeah, Jacare could get a title shot. But really, I think the front runner already, right now, as we speak today, is Michael Bisping. Jeez, it's Chris Weidman, right? I think the other component here is if you already consider that to be the position because of what you said, him and Bisping have had words. But what words have they had? Weidman has cast doubt about the very nature of Bisping's championship, that this was an aberrant, total fortuitous event for you, which you have then held on to by fighting a guy outside the top 10 and then GSP, which Bisping has kind of fit into a little bit, right? So he has cast out about it the whole time. And the other part about it is, look, beating Yoel Romero is super hard to do.
Yeah.
No one's done it yet.
Yeah.
No one's done it yet.
Yeah.
So if Weidman can, I mean, even if it's a split decision, if he just turns the corner and gets on the mic and says, Michael Bisping, you're next. I mean,
He's a psych major,
that's
right?
it.
Like the
That's
guy,
it.
he knows what he's doing.
Okay, slight tangent here. How do you feel about the way Bisping handled the whole situation last week? Because, a couple days prior, he's campaigning openly for GSP and Nick Diaz. All of a sudden, Jacare is available, and everyone's like, all right, now you have an opponent for 206. And then he goes on UFC Tonight and says, he's hurt here, there. And I believe that he is hurt. I believe that he's banged up. And I understand that he wanted the payday, but man, oh man, that was a tough spot to be in. How do you feel like, how do you feel about the way that whole situation unfolded for Mr. Bisping?
I mean, he certainly got backed into a
Yes.
bad look, right?
Yeah.
Like the optics of that were not in his favor at the end. But also, I mean, you can kind of understand where he was coming from. Where, I mean, what is he? 38, 39,
37.
In that regard, yeah.
He's at the end of his career. He's capitalized. He's in this moment right now in his career where it's not going to get better for him. It's anything from this point on is just gravy at this point. He's trying to capitalize on whatever money fights that he can get and make as much as possible. So I can understand the idea of, hey, I'm a little banged up, but if I can get a GSP or if I can get a Nick Diaz and get a couple more mil in the bank account, I can force my body through that. But Jacare is a completely different demon in that regard.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sean.
I mean, I was basically going to echo that. And the GSP thing, who wouldn't want it? And I think if he's not coming off of that Henderson fight, which didn't make sense, and I know we went on and on about this, like, if he doesn't come off of that Henderson fight, maybe you would have some more sympathy for his position. But the fact that he came off of a fight that was sort of thrown together to basically be a homecoming for him, going home with the belt against the guy who's going to get revenge, to call his next shot and then to not, to have something like this happen. It was very weird, you know what I mean? But I completely understand why he should have just never lobbied for it openly. I think behind closed doors he should have operated that way.
Okay,
Real quickly,
go ahead.
about Michael Bisping.
Yeah.
I have not spoken to him, but I have reason to believe that he doesn't have, like, to your point, he's not. If he fought 3 more times in the UFC, I'd be surprised, very surprised.
yeah,
I bet
he
it's
wants
one
to cash in.
1 or 2 more times. So he saw a GSP fight, he was like,
Yeah.
broken orbital be damned, I'm about to get paid.
Sure.
Peace.
I hope he
And
does fight Nick Diaz.
I
It's like
understand that.
at some point, maybe not this next one, but
Right.
even if he loses the belt, I still would like to see that fight at some point.
Also want to ask you guys about Miesha Tate, who is completely flying under the radar. She is fighting Raquel Pennington. And, John Pollock of the Fight Network brought this up to me yesterday. Miesha Tate, this year alone, fought on 196 as champion, so alongside Conor McGregor. She was supposed to fight as champion alongside Conor at 200, and now she's back with Conor again. And I think
That's
the
why she
UFC
flies under the radar.
maybe, and I think the UFC has a lot of faith in her. I mean, you look at her social media numbers, whatever those means. I mean, she is, without a doubt, just based on those numbers alone, top 6, 7 most popular fighters in the UFC. To me, her greatest trait, her biggest strength has always been that she's unbreakable. Like, you can beat her, but you can't really break her. It's hard to finish her. It's hard to bend her. And Amanda Nunes did that in like 3 minutes. And I'm just fascinated about this idea of a champion losing in that fashion, who's never lost like that before. How does she respond? Where does she go from here? So I kind of feel like this is a crossroads fight for Miesha Tate, and especially she's fighting someone who she coached on The Ultimate Fighter. I know that's a bit of a, it's inauthentic coaching, but to me, this is really like a crossroads
She's more
fight for her.
resilient than any maybe any fighter going. I mean, she is so resilient. I know we had a discussion on here at one point. The women's category particularly, like the losses for whatever reason, they take a long time to come back. I mean, it's documented. You can look it up. There's a lot, like, here we are, Ronda Rousey waiting her return. Losses somehow linger a lot longer, but not with her. She's been consistently, she'll lose, but she fights pretty quickly after. I feel like it won't. I feel like you're going to see her in her vintage form, like the way she always does because of that. You know what I mean? Like she's just, she always just kind of comes right back, and I think it helps her mind to get over things, to just be planning for a fight, training for a fight, and moving on.
Yeah, and also this fight is, I would not categorize this fight as okay, now I'm ready to jump back up again. I mean, she's fighting somebody who really is a little lower in the pecking order than she is. So so it's sort of to your point about where she's at mentally or even just physically right now. This might be an opportunity for her to right the ship a little bit, and so that would be something that's good. But she does. I mean, it's funny. When I was counting up all the fights and saying, okay, there's 4 champions and 4 and then 3 ex-champions, and I was trying to come up with the names, and somehow Misha's presence kind of just slipped my mind there, and that's just one of those things about her. But yeah, she's always there.
Would you categorize this as a tune-up fight for Miesha Tate?
Yes. There's no real tune-up fights in the UFC because Raquel Pennington is a very good fighter. So a tune-up would be something like top 20 in the world. This is a little bit closer. So given the way in which Miesha Tate complained about how hard it is for her to cut weight when it didn't used to be, which contributed to, I think, maybe some of her loss against Amanda Nunes, and of course the way in which she lost to Amanda Nunes. It's not a true tune-up fight, but I feel like one of the big mistakes RDA made was he loses his title. He goes, all right, I want to go fight the number 1 contender right away. Now you're nowhere even close to the discussion. This is a more moderated pace back, and I think this is the real key to this. Never underestimate how weird the Ronda Rousey sweepstakes could get. What if she goes in there, she beats Amanda Nunes and goes, yeah, I'd like to fight Miesha Tate again. We would all scream bloody murder, but it would sell. Yeah. And frankly, Ronda probably would like her chances in that fight. And I don't like that discussion or the way it would go, but it would work. It would work.
Okay, so this is a perfect segue. Let's talk about Ronda Rousey for a second, because I believe that this card had to have either Ronda Rousey or Conor McGregor on it in order to really feel historic and special. Ronda wasn't ready. They get Conor McGregor. It feels historic and special. And we didn't have a show last week, so this is sort of last week's news, but I really want to weigh in on it. She was on the Ellen show and said, oh, by the way, get me while you can, catch me while you can. You better tune in on December 30th because I'm not going to be around for a lot longer. This monkey is going to keep dancing for all of you for very much longer, so you better order this show. And then, Ellen was kind of playing into that.
This is so weird, by the way.
Yeah. Okay, and I have thoughts on that as well, but I want to ask you guys first. Sean, I'll start with you. What did you make of this? Did this feel genuine to you? And then you see how the UFC kind of grabbing that baton and running with it. Dana White keeps mentioning it in interviews. Did this feel genuine, or did this sort of feel like a marketing thing for you?
To me, it's a little bit of A and B. I mean, it's definitely a marketing tool. Just the idea of, again, like you said, this isn't going to be here very long. Catch it while you can. I mean, that sells. That's a way to, I got to see the last few Ronda Rousey fights before she's gone type of situation, just because her fights are a very big deal. But I mean, it did seem somewhat genuine too. I mean, she's been a ghost for the past year, and she's handled that loss in a way that I don't feel like I've personally ever seen a fighter handle a loss in terms of just taking it very hard. And would anyone amongst us be surprised if she retired after a loss to Amanda Nunes, or just whatever her next loss is, if she retired right after that? I don't think anybody would. So there was certainly a level of genuineness to it.
I think she's just, it's a psychological thing. I really believe that she's trying to downplay it as much as she can. She's trying to make it the least scrutinized, because I think part of when she went into 193, I think first of all, I think she was buying into her own invincibility, which is always a dangerous thing to do. But I think she was also just fed up in general with all that was going on. She wanted the break. I just get the sense that she's trying not to, I don't think it's marketing, I think she's just trying to say, like, how can I make this accessible for me to do again? How do I do that? Well, I'm going to start mentioning outs, because that at least gives me, I see the exit door. Depending on what happens here, you know what I'm saying? That's how I feel like she's doing that. It's more psychological to take the immense pressure off of her heading into the fight. You know?
Yeah, of course.
If you look at, historically, you look at Ronda Rousey, even like reading her autobiography, she kind of gets always been fueled by negative stuff. So even though we've talked about her taking this loss really hard, when I was listening or watching that her appearance on that Ellen show, she seemed not sad. She seemed really happy, and I don't know whether how this translates over into athletes, but certainly my experience with artists, with musicians and so forth. Oftentimes, the ones who are the happiest put out the worst work. The ones who have that angst inside them, they're the ones that can really reach inside and deliver something really special. And I wonder whether, because it seems as though her situation with Travis Brown, they seem like that she has it together in this. It's going well. She's really happy with this relationship, and maybe she doesn't need to. Maybe she feels like she doesn't need to fight the same.
She's retreated pretty heavily into this. Her life, it's just she's retreated so far in there. It's really hard to know. It's just really difficult to know where she's going in, because I feel like we keep speculating on this because she's just not really speaking. And then she goes, and speaks to Ellen, who's just like, "Oh, you're gonna win, baby. Don't worry, you got it." It's just you're not getting any kind of real interview there.
There's no way she talks to Ellen without some level of coordination between the teams. Like I don't know if they got a list of questions or not, but there's no way they were like, here you go, Charlie Rose, ask whatever you want. No, I don't think so. I want to give a shout out real quickly, if I can, to an MMA fighting viewer on YouTube, who is a very special guy, Pete Rubish. Pete Rubish is an American powerlifter, and he once made a point competitively that has really stuck with me. He is famous because he does the deadlift, which is the king of the lifts, Ariel Helwani. I don't know if you know that.
I just did one this morning.
Hold on, hear me out. He is famous because he used to rage out, and then he would go and try and deadlift. And what he realized was, competitively, as Jeff was alluding to, if you are fueled by negativity or rage or just these angry emotions, you burn bright, but you burn fast. That's nothing you can sustain. And if you watch him deadlift now, he is preternaturally calm the whole time. And now he's lifting above 900 pounds. Go get him, Pete.
Yeah.
Anyway. Here's the connection. Ronda Rousey, she is burning bright, but whoa, she burns fast. She got the bronze medal in judo, and everyone thought, boy, the next Olympic cycle, she is poised for the gold. And she said, no thanks. And that's okay. You don't have to be anything you don't want to be. But I feel like we're seeing that play out in this other competitive chapter in her career. She burned so bright, but once things didn't go in a way that she was happy with, which again is absolutely her choice, she just kind of said, you know what, I've got options. F off. Did she have options when she left the Olympics? No. She was a bartender. It didn't matter. She was just emotionally spent. And I feel like that she's reached a similar level.
Does she have the same options, though? I mean, we don't see the movie talk as much. We don't see that kind of
Let's
buzz.
say something. Let's say, do you think she's garnered, netted, $20 million?
Yeah.
She's fine.
She's fine.
She's fine.
Okay, so
Get a financial planner and you're fine for life.
So wanting to add on something that you just said, those talk show interviews, as I think we all know, are the fakest thing in Hollywood. I mean, those things are completely planned.
It's PR.
It's someone calls her the night before, says, "What do you want to talk about? We're going to ask you this." I mean, there is nothing journalistic about those interviews. And if you go back, and I watched it a couple of times because I wanted to see, and I mean, this is not me hating on Ellen DeGeneres, because I think she's a fantastic host and she does whatever she does. No, so if you see the way she reacted to that little nugget, because I think any of us talking to Ronda in that moment and she drops that, you're like, oh wow, and I think you have a bit of enthusiasm, so okay, you start to perk up. The way she came back with it felt like it was, they were volleying in a tennis match. It felt so very inauthentic, and to me, this just screamed of, and the fact that they're now playing it up. Because when a fighter typically says this might be it for me, the UFC doesn't play it up as a promotional tool. But the fact that they are playing it up, the fact that she is represented by WME, the fact that WME needs to make a lot of money off of this pay-per-view tells me that this is so fake, this is so inauthentic. And to me, it's like, okay.
As in, you don't believe her?
I don't believe, look, do I believe that she is close to burning out or wanted to leave or might not be long for this sport? Yes. I don't believe that a fighter who says this, especially in that manner, is being honest with the public. Do you get what I'm saying? What I mean is that, like, when a fighter says to me in an interview, I may not have a lot of time left in the sport, I consider retirement, things like that, I tend to believe them, but it's always a warning sign like, okay, if you got a foot out the door, you're probably done, you probably shouldn't be fighting. I think Ronda could go one or two ways. I think if she beats Amanda Nunes and wins a couple more, she's going to be around. I really do believe that. I just think that they came up with this selling point, like, the Ronda show may be over, you better get on this train.
And then so just go back to a regular competitive schedule?
I think so, if she wins.
No,
So
but
my
if she
point
loses,
is,
no.
my point is the fact that they are using this feels dishonest. The fact that they are trying to use this as a tool to promote the fight feels dishonest to me. Like, Ronda Rousey's return should be enough. Ronda Rousey's return with the caveat of her maybe leaving afterwards, to me, it just feels dishonest. It feels dishonest to the public who love Ronda Rousey. And more to that point, you know, we heard recently Dana White said that the media turned on Ronda, and Ronda is not talking to any of the MMA media leading up to this fight. I was talking to a veteran journalist who we all know, who was very frustrated about the fact that he couldn't talk to Ronda Rousey. He's like, I've never done anything to Ronda Rousey. I've only been fair to her, and I think we've all been fair to her. What is this idea that the fact that we're being shunned? And this is not me, like, you know, I'm not going to cry if I don't speak to Ronda Rousey before this fight. I already told the world that prior to 193, she wouldn't talk to any of us. On our website, she wouldn't talk to me. So
And she hung up on Mark Raimondi.
I'm living in this reality. But this idea that, like, we were all there covering you when you were on the Strikeforce Challenger shows, and now we turned on you because you lost a fight, like every fighter doesn't lose. What is this idea? I just don't like the way this. I don't like the way this whole thing is being presented to us. Yeah. Like that she is this amazing, you know, gift from God that we better catch while she can. But by the way, media guys, you can't speak to her. She's only going to speak to these people. And you know, fans, you know, like, the whole thing just. I don't know. It's turned me off a little bit. I don't know if I'm speaking, you know, I'm representing myself here, but I don't like the way it's being done.
Look, I was singing the praises of Tony Ferguson earlier. He said something on David Martin's podcast about me turning my back on him. I don't know exactly what he's referring to. I'm trying to get in touch with him to figure that out with his management. But it's a common thing that this is not the first time a fighter has done this. Now, Ronda is obviously a significantly different story for all of us, but. There is this perception that, like, we are an arm of PR, or that if we say a nice thing, that must mean we have these loyalties to you. And certainly we have a responsibility to be truthful to the extent that we can be. I mean, you know, to find the truth as we understand it, to be professional, and I think also to be courteous. These guys are out there doing incredible things, and the fans in social media can be, you know, as a bulwark against that, they can be very, very difficult, right? So I think there's something to be said for that. But, like, Ronda Rousey is the beneficiary of the most outrageous hagiography I have ever seen for an athlete in my entire career. The gall, the balls, metaphorically, to accuse the media of turning our back, whatever that's supposed to mean,
yeah.
when she is the recipient of things like she's once in a lifetime, or Ramona Shelburne's genuflecting before her is shocking to the point of laughability. I have never seen an athlete receive fawning, real-time, you know, biography like this, and then to turn around and be like, the media was unfair. You couldn't possibly be more ludicrous if you tried.
I think you're just answered the question though there has been a lot of fawning on Ronda Rousey, and not just her. A lot of the people who when they are on top, there is fawning. It happens certainly within the press corps around this sport, and to some extent around the press corps in other sports as well. But when that no longer is happening, that's something that you come to expect. If you're getting it that way, you come to expect that. And as soon as something happens where you're no longer the flavor of the week, and you're not getting fawned over the same way, then they turn their back on me. And it's just, you know.
Are they confusing like Twitter trolls and the media?
I think that's what it is, right?
And how can an educated person make that confusion? Like, how can you make that connection? How can you not make the distinction between the two?
I feel like when you're within that bubble, right, and you're just being bombarded with whatever sort of weird form of hate that is, because there was a very strong backlash.
Absolutely.
Because after UFC 190, which was when she knocked out Bethe Correia in Brazil, it reached such an immense fever pitch, and that's when you get the once in human history, and she has perfect form, and all of this stuff that happened. It was it was just such an odd sense, and I think the crash from that. I personally, I have no idea what that has to have.
I think we don't envy her, but I think that we actually sympathized with her more than the casual fighter who loses. I think we actually tried to prop her up after that.
Level delusion to think that the way she handled it was going to be praised. I can't even imagine. That's asking a lot of everybody to be like, I'm going to show up, put a bag over my head after representing what she stood for going in. It became farcical almost. If you're not pointing that out, then you're not doing your job. That's part of your job, is to say, like, hey, where's this person who's the champion who stepped in there to begin with? What happened to that person? And she has yet to do anything about that, other than to go on and do these little Ellen DeGeneres things like that. how is that turning on her? That is actually reporting what you know or what you're seeing and observing. That's so naive for her to, if that's really the case. Of course, we're sitting here dissecting something that came from Dana's mouth, not her own. But I'm like, it's
No, but
naive.
she's doing it. She's the one who's saying she's not talking to the MMA
She
media.
did the EA Sports thing, and remember they caught her on Australian videotape. They were going to ask her about the fights, and her press people were like, no, only questions about the video game. Do you remember that?
I didn't see it.
It leaked out.
Oh, yeah.
And so they have this controlling message. The other part is everyone's like, oh man, she got wrecked in terms of all the fans and the media after her loss. And certainly, look, there's no doubt about it. The stock market crashed. That is a pimple on the ass of what LeBron James got when his various quite public failings by a much greater wider fan base and a much nastier sports core.
Let me just attempt to clarify my earlier statement. And so I was told, when the whole 193 thing happened, where she didn't want to talk to our website, she didn't want to talk to me.
Way to go, Ariel.
I thought quite unfairly. This is what I was told by a member.
On the way to Melbourne.
Yeah, exactly. The day I was leaving, by the way.
That's fun.
This is what I was told by a member of her team. You have been put in the penalty box. That was the quote. And to me, this
You're
is
Canadian. I think you're sort of. They were
to me, this goes back to this idea that I was talking about. Catch me while you can. The show's not going to last forever.
Yeah.
We're constantly being told by the promotion, by her team, that this is a privilege. That it is a privilege.
Well, she does not have to speak to anyone.
Absolutely.
She's under no obligation
but
to talk
just
to
being
us.
in this presence is a privilege,
Oh, I see what
and
you
now
mean.
we're taking it away from you.
Yeah.
And guess what? You need to be a good little boy, and you need to ask the right little questions, and then maybe you'll get it back. And I feel like the MMA media is constantly being told this by, we're there covering every single damn event, Fight Night 91, 92, 93, and then when it comes to the big dance, then when it comes to yesterday at MSG, we couldn't ask Conor a single question. We couldn't ask Eddie Alvarez a single question. But in the back, there's the dude who has been covering the UFC for 5 minutes, who gets, the one-on-one. You get what I'm saying? It's we're the ones.
But that's the way it is. I mean, that's the way. This is not just a Ronda thing. The UFC in general. I mean, they are aiming for something bigger. They're going to take somewhat, for granted, MMA fighting, MMA junkie, Sherdog. Those
That's
are the
smart.
these. Well, in their minds, they want to get out there into the wider, bigger audience. I mean, look, I'm covering Saturday's fight for the Washington Post. I haven't been cage side for, 6 or 8 months for a fight, but because I'm covering for a large and mainstream media outlet, I had no problem getting a credential. I know a lot of the MMA media, some people did.
You're cage side, right?
I'll be cage side, and
Not
I'll
a single
probably
member of the MMAfighting.com team is cage side. Isn't that amazing?
Right, but that's-
And I'm not saying that's you. That's because the outlet.
Right, but it's not me. Exactly. It's and the people, I'm sure that ESPN will be, and if the New York Times has somebody in the Daily News, these are all these people are going to be there because that's who the UFC wants to reach out to. I think that's kind of a separate issue from the topic that we raised.
I don't think
mostly.
so, because Rhonda's showing up on the Ellen show and she's going to do some other stuff, and she'll never, maybe she'll do a conference call or so. And again, I realize that this is sort of a difficult time for her and she needs to get back on track and things like that. But this constant hey, MMA media, I don't want to, we're almost taken for granted. They know we're going to be there.
Totally.
They know we're going to be there covering the Halifax show in February. But when it comes to the fact that there's a big dance, there's a big event, and the world is watching, and these are the ones that, these are kind of the cherries on top, right? This is the gravy from the day-to-day grind. We're constantly being told that, no, you guys aren't good enough. And that's
not good enough. It's a matter of you guys.
What
are
else
going
is
to-
it? What else is
well,
it?
you guys are delivering the audience we already have. We want to go for that audience that we don't have. So at the Ellen, how many people who watch the Ellen show?
Control narratives the other way.
Yeah,
Right,
but
exactly.
isn't there a way of juggling both? Isn't there a way?
I'll say one thing about it. I think generally I understand giving. I would like to be cage side, and I was offered a spot actually in the arena, which I was shocked by. But I'll be in the media room because I actually want to be there for the scrums. But I understand why Jeff has a seat on cage side. I mean, I understand the community of the Washington Post serves. That's my community in DC. I get that one, right? So okay, fair enough. The point that I don't understand from their media strategy is to the one, especially as it relates to you, right? And this was always to me the genius of Mayweather. If you had an HBO camera and a crew or whatever, Jeremy Schaap and your thing, he would treat you with respect. If you had no light on your nubs exploding Samsung Galaxy 7 or whatever, he would treat you exactly the same because we put work on a platform, YouTube, that is democratized, and we have actually a built-in audience, and all kinds of your stuff always bubbles up to the surface. That to me is a bit myopic, that they wouldn't quite understand that it's not about you or me or MMA fighting. This is going on YouTube. This is this enormous platform, this search engine that reaches virality like that. And we will ask the questions that will put virality in play in a way that perhaps they're not comfortable with. So maybe that's the reservation. But there is a little bit of myopia there.
I also think that they also know that the MMA devoted media will be there no matter what. You got, if even with somebody not sitting right next to the cage, the coverage you guys have is going to be immense. The coverage that Junkie's going to have, they're going to be all over the place. If you're aiming for some other mainstream media, whatever other, just name all the different media that they might be aiming for, and then you deny those people, access right there in that press row, they'll be like, maybe we won't cover this thing. So there's a kind of they have that, it's a little bit practical for those guys. I'm not saying that I agree with it. I think that the people who are covering the sport ought to be covering the sport, and ought to be treated with respect. But I understand what they're going for. And look, it does happen. It's starting to happen in other sports. I mean, Mark Cuban just banned ESPN from having press access to his game, not because of not because of nasty editorial coverage, just because they weren't covering every game. So it happens. These guys, people who run the show, they have their agenda.
Okay, so speaking of that, I mean, you brought up the Khabib interview, or maybe it was you. I guess he was disappointed that I didn't give him the heads up, privately about what I believed was going on and what was in fact the truth. Do you guys struggle? And maybe because I'm doing more interviews, I'm put in this position more. Do you guys struggle with the balancing act of trying to tell the truth, trying to report accurately, fairly, honestly, and fighters in this sport who we see coming up the ranks who aren't getting enough attention? We're the only ones covering these guys really on a day-to-day basis, other than the top 1%, and they're like, oh man, you're a columnist. I know Ben Folks had to deal with this a lot, and they're like, you betrayed me. You called me out, and maybe Jeremy Stevens felt this way as well by some of us, like, oh, you guys betrayed me. Do you guys struggle with that? Why? And maybe this is something that you guys could speak to who have covered other sports. Why do so many MMA fighters and promoters feel like it is always our duty as MMA journalists, as the MMA-specific journalism core, to quote-unquote promote them and promote the sport? We've heard this before, right? Why do they feel that way?
The stupid ones are the ones that think that way.
Luke Thomas?
Well, there are plenty of... the game has evolved enough now where there are plenty of people who are dealing in the back end, the management and all that stuff, that understand you're doing your job. They understand your job. I think that's the first part. If I'm writing a column that's going to be an opinion, or it's going to be based on an opinion or some observation, it's not going to be based on fact. I'm not gilding fact. You're just basically giving a perception of what you see. And I feel like, for the most part, people understand what that's about. But there are plenty of people, and I've seen this a million times, where they cannot tell the difference between one thing versus the other. And that's where I fall into trouble. Is a news piece is obviously not the same thing. It's not the same thing as an opinion. Or if you're doing you're doing a profile, or you're quoting somebody, it's not the same thing. You know what I mean? So I feel like I've encountered both ways where people have gotten mad at me, and I know that this has happened to you, for something that their fighter is said, and you're just repeating it back, and you're you know what I mean? And I remember the Tim Sylvia thing that blew up.
Oh yeah.
Which was something that his manager Monty Cox said about him. It was a pull quote in the piece about him being a fat, whatever, winning the belt. Well, he meant it as an endearment. It's just, it was taken out of context. It was put into this, and it was still a quote from his manager, but yet I had to hear about that as if it was me doing that. And I feel like that's the big divide. People don't really understand the different functions of these articles, but I still encounter, and I'm sure you guys do too, plenty of people who, if they're going to give you an interview, they expect you to be doing some glowing piece. I've had managers basically try to give me the angle. Like, here's your angle. Hey, talk to him about this. That's okay on some level. Talk to him about this. He's got this to talk about. But to say, like, don't ask about this and don't do this, I mean, it's just other level nuttiness. You're like, what do you think is going on here? We're not an arm of PR for you. And some people in this sport particularly are still stuck in that.
Yeah,
I struggle with it all the time.
Yeah.
And here's just my rule about it. Again, you got to be professional and you got to be courteous. I really believe that, like, even if they say crazy things to you or whoever, you just got to be really polite and a little bit of turn the other cheek. But if someone gets mad at me for something I have no idea what I did, or just in the course of doing my job, and they don't want to talk to me anymore, okay, I am perfectly willing to accept that. That is a cost of doing business. I will pay that tax every time. And that will inhibit me in the growth of my career to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's just something you have to reconcile.
it's just that's fine. All right.
Okay, let's end on this one.
Positive note.
I'm not sure if it is, but I love talking about this journalism stuff. Anyhow, Phil Davis is the new Bellator light heavyweight champion. Bellator has an event, I think it's actually going on right now in Tel Aviv, that's airing tomorrow on Spike TV via tape delay, which is a bizarre thing in this day and age to do, but they're flying under the radar right now, and they get this bad news yesterday that their highly anticipated, I guess you want to call that, fight, a highly anticipated one, the Tito Ortiz Chael Sonnen fight on January 21st, is going to be happening in the same state, a few miles away from UFC 208. Their fight is happening in Inglewood. The UFC fight is happening in Anaheim. So that's a bit of a headache as well. But I want to ask you guys specifically about Phil Davis winning, skunking Liam McGeary, dominating Liam McGeary. Now here you have a guy who's a top 5 light heavyweight who the UFC said, as much as we want to call Phil Davis sort of the pioneer of this free agent age, he really wasn't, because the UFC didn't extend him a contract. It wasn't his decision necessarily to leave. But anyway, he goes to Bellator, he wins the belt in rather dominant fashion. And now you have Benson Henderson coming up, who the UFC did kind of extend an offer to, but didn't go after him aggressively. He's fighting Michael Chandler next week. So what happens if all these, ex-UFC guys become Bellator champions? This is a dangerous game, I think, for Bellator, because now you're playing this sort of B-League type of game, and fans will be like, look, these guys weren't good enough to be in the UFC, now they're your champions. Was this a bad thing for Bellator, and is it a worse thing for Bellator if Benson Henderson wins next week in San Jose?
I wouldn't say it's a worse thing, just because Benson Henderson is such a known commodity. I mean, he's still a popular fighter. He has looked a little strange in Bellator thus far with the Koreshkov fight and the Pitbull fight, but I mean, people still know him. He fought on Fox several times. He's a UFC champion who defended the lightweight belt just as many times as anybody ever. So having that as your lightweight champion, I would say most people would consider. So
it's better to have the more known name? Yeah,
I mean, also it's just it helps. It's in this day where promotions are so fractured and we don't know how good Michael Chandler actually is. And same with Liam McGeary. I mean, having these guys come in and be able to kind of be a measuring stick, because I mean, I think we would all agree Phil Davis is a top 5 light heavyweight probably, and so having him just be able to test Liam McGeary so we can figure out, kind of just start to piece together where these people rest on the rankings and just in general within their space. I wouldn't say that's a bad thing, because then you do get guys like a Koreshkov who, before that fight, it was a given Benson was going to beat Koreshkov, and now I know Koreshkov, you know Koreshkov, people look forward to a
We watched
Koreshkov
that fight together. Shocked.
yeah.
It helps that you've got a guy like Eddie Alvarez, though, right, on the UFC side of it, who's fighting for.
That's a good point.
So, I mean, it's one of those things that I think anybody who, and you particularly, who can watch skill and really understand what they're watching, will know that there are plenty of people in Bellator who could compete and be very successful in the UFC. There are guys who they've brought up who could do that. But it's just... I think it's just the partition in general. You want to assign an alpha and you want to assign the B. It's like so I feel like we tend to do that, and I think when Benson Henderson went over there and lost, that was sort of a win in a strange way for Bellator, because it's like, hey, you guys are sleeping on our guys over here who are waiting to beat up those guys, even though he was completely oversized. He was overmatched with the size and all that, but. I can see it going both ways, but it does help when guys come over to the other side of it, like Eddie Alvarez. And if he wins this fight, I mean, it's just that's their Bellator kind of wins in that way too.
Fair point.
And I think we also have to be clear as to why it is that Phil Davis was not, was basically shown the door by the UFC. It wasn't because he couldn't compete with those guys. He's, like we just said, he's a top 5 guy, but he's just not an exciting fighter. He's a guy, he blankets. He tries to stand up, but he doesn't really have the the dynamism to be a great striker. But he can take you down, and like he did in that title fight. So that seems to go against the model that I've kind of attributed to Bellator. That Bellator's slogan should be like, "We bang, y'all," because that's really what they do. They have the guys who are going to come out there and rock'em sock'em robots. and that's not Phil Davis. So is it a change in the guard? Are they going to change the way they do things, go about their business? Or is this kind of be just an outlier where, well, we've got this guy who just happens to be one of the top light heavyweights in the world, and he's not the most exciting fighter, but he could beat just about all the guys over in that other company.
I was at the Bellator event at Mohegan-Sun a couple weeks ago where Phil Davis won, and there were a lot of knockouts. So the crowd was very alive. I was actually impressed with it. It was so alive in that building, the energy, and Brendan Ward's got all these people there. It's just one of these great atmospheres until that fight started to play out, and it died in there. And you just look at that sort of thing and you think, man, it's almost like he's so good at what he does that's so aesthetically non-pleasing to the viewer. And it's just, I think once he's doing it, you know that that's going to go the course. There's not a big threat. I know he was trying for some submissions, but you get the feeling you're in for 25 minutes of exactly what you're seeing. And I think that always puts people just, on snooze. They just don't want, they know it's coming. It's like the old John Fitch, Yushin Okami, these guys who would fight a very specific way. If it seems like it's going to go the duration, like it's been established that we're going to duration, you're going to see this exact thing the whole way through. It's just tough to watch. I felt like that building figured it out in the first round. There was some excitement to it early on, but I felt like the building just crashed. That whole energy crashed during that fight.
You want to say something?
The Coker method is well known. He tells you all about it. Sign from the top down, build from the bottom up. And that's exactly what he's doing. You want to sign the best available talent. Now, they've passed on some guys. They passed on Aljamain Sterling for a variety of reasons. But you want guys like Phil Davis to come over and win. Now, to that point, I don't think Benson Henderson's going to beat Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler, I think, has something for him. So we'll see how that goes. Could be wrong, of course. But that's why you signed Rory McDonald, because you want them to come over and smash people. Why? So you can build something around that. Maybe some other guys who think they can build, get by, oh, wow, a guy that good can beat in that organization. I'll go over there, too. You may have to take an L in the short run, but that's a long-term play, and I think it's the right one.
Well, yeah, the guy who inevitably beats a Phil Davis or inevitably beats a Rory McDonald, then you can prop that guy up as look at our homegrown top guy in the world.
Liam McGeary was that guy, right?
I don't think he was that guy.
You don't think so?
Liam McGeary is a super talented guy, and I actually think we haven't seen the best of him yet, but he still has got this old mentality of playing guard when, as a long, lanky light heavyweight, you need to switch that up fast.
Also, though, it's worked for him. In his defense, I mean, it's worked for him
against Emmanuel Newton.
Sure, but I think that's a reality. Once it hits you, then you realize.
He does.
And Tito, you can't forget that Tito fight.
Well, you know what? I mean, that's ADCC material right there. So.
Okay, on this show, we don't make predictions. We're not a fight prediction show, but I want to make one final prediction, or I want you guys to make this prediction. I want to throw it out there before we say goodbye and head over to MSG for the press conference. I'm setting the line at 1.8 million pay-per-views. Over under UFC 205.
Ooh, I will say under.
Under? How under?
1.6, 1.7.
Okay.
Maybe even 1.8, right around there.
Wow. What about you?
I would also say under, and I partly wonder, not to get political, but what effect the election result has
a great point.
On this, because it seems like the sentiment for the excitement for this fight has definitely shifted a little bit.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if that is going to have any effect and how it would have an effect. I'm going to go under.
People are just not, they're just not in the mood.
There's other things to focus on right now.
Right.
And usually you'd watch this type of thing as a distraction, but I tend to think it's going to be under as well.
Drastically under?
Not drastically. I still think it's going to do, like you were saying, 1.6. It'd still be like a ridiculous amount, but I just think with Diaz, obviously, there was just something about it. People were talking about the buzz of that fight was just so much bigger in this weird. I don't really feel like you're getting that with McGregor on this one, even though he's going for the history.
Really?
Yeah, not really. There's
Is that an indictment on Eddie?
Second Diaz.
The second one.
Is that an indictment on Eddie?
The first one just didn't have enough time to get.
So is that an indictment on Eddie?
Maybe, but it could be a lot of things. But I feel it here in this city. I feel like there's excitement about it. You're seeing the billboards everywhere. I'm not feeling it in the sense like, you always kind of gauge from your casual people who follow the sport when they're not really talking about it. You just don't feel like you're hearing about it a lot. I don't know.
Also, though, I would jump in real quick. Maybe that changes today.
It could
change. Because I remember being at UFC 202, and we were saying the same exact thing until that press conference, and then all of a sudden that. Boom,
that's a good point. Look what happened the last time.
Maybe sometimes you do get in the bubble so deep that you don't really see what's going on.
I just want to gauge things the same way you gauge it, by talking to you guys, but by talking to people who don't care about the sport at all. Those are the people, when they started talking about Ronda Rousey, when they started talking about Conor McGregor, when they started talking about Nate Diaz, I was having friends who were like talking about these guys. I'm like, really? You guys, you know who they are? Because, we do. We exist in this little bubble here. And I haven't been hearing a lot of that from people outside of the MMA world. But God, this should be. I mean, if we're talking about what it's going to be, it's one thing. But if we're talking about what it should be, this is so much bigger than anything we've seen before. I mean, 3 title fights, one of them being one of those rare champion versus champion fights. 3 people who wore a championship belt competing again. One of them being like, the best New York area fighter, so that the building's being elected for Weidman. I mean, the best guy from Jersey is going to be there. I don't know how that's going to translate, but I'm guessing that the building is going to be electric for those guys. I mean, this is, Wonder Boy. I mean, it's not even just the main event. Wonder Boy is fighting in the co-main, and Jacek and Wonder Boy. Those are 2 of the most exciting strikers we have in the sport, and they're not Conor McGregor even. So I mean, there's the excitement level. To me, this should be like a $2 million pay-per-view, but I just don't know that it's actually going to go.
I love it. I mean, wait, that was the Jeff Wagenheim version of the Dana White, Joe Rogan Yellathon.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the greatest. They need to cut that clip and put it on FS1 on Saturday night.
I was way low volume.
What a promo that was.
There should have been 2
That was something else. Kudos to you, my friend.
Let me just say something. As a guy who has gone to shows, and Sean can attest to this, for Bellator events, you show up to a town, you could not tell that Bellator was doing a show there. Yeah. This is my first Conor McGregor fight in person. Y'all don't feel the buzz? I feel it big time.
Yeah.
We're talking about outside of it.
Okay, but even then, I'm getting texts from my brother who only watches super casual levels. I feel like the buzz is super legit. Maybe I'm on my own anecdotal experience, but there you go.
It's a fun time.
Yeah.
It's fun to be here doing this show. Like I said,
except for Jeff. Jeff ruined everything.
No,
you compared me to Dana White and
That
Joe
was
Rogan.
Fantastic. It was fantastic. It was a compliment.
I'm humiliated now.
To me, it was a very honest pitch as to why this card is so special. And I'll tell you what, as you mentioned, it has been for some people a bit of a difficult week. Maybe this card comes at the right time. Maybe this is just what the doctor ordered. Sports, in my opinion, the best escape valve from our day-to-day lives. And of course, this is reality, and we are dealing with other stuff that you don't want to hear us talk about on this show, but maybe on Saturday night we can just not think about stuff that's bothering us and enjoy what really is one of the best nights in MMA history, or at least on paper should be. So enjoy it, take it all in, have fun, celebrate the sport. If you're the guy who's inviting some friends over to watch for the first time, be that guy. Tell them why this is so special. Just have fun with it all, because these are the kind of nights that I think we all love and dream about when we first get into this sport, covering it and just being a fan, at least speaking for myself. We'll say goodbye for now. We're going to cover the press conference later, so stay tuned for that coverage over on MMAfighting.com. We'll recap that as well. Tomorrow we'll be at the official weigh-ins in the morning, the ceremonial weigh-ins later on in the night, and of course Saturday night, again, a very special night. We'll have your usual MMAfighting.com coverage. Good afternoon. I was going to say good night, but it is still the afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. What's your name? Luke, Sean, Chuck,
McGee.
Jeff. There's so many of them here. The A++ team in the house. I am Ariel. Again, thank you so much for watching, and enjoy the fights on Saturday night.